Okay.
There. So you want me to take two?
No, now it's recording. So if you could, I'll introduce you again. I'm going to introduce Lana and Nicole to our extended learning calls for the EHDI program. We're recording these so that others can learn from what is all involved in the EHDI program, and they will probably be loaded up on the EHDI site. So Lana and Nicole are going to be discussing language access and the PIP program. So thank you for letting me restart this because the recording wasn't working. So
No worries. No worries. We can do it.
Yeah.
So I'm Nicole Swartout, and I am the coordinator for the Parent Infant School Age Outreach Team. We were asked last week, we did a presentation that was focused and geared towards what our Parent Infant program is and what we offer through that and when to call us. And this week we are talking about language, and access is the name of the game. Here's our team, Parent Infant and School Age Outreach. So we cover birth to graduation across the state of North Dakota. Tammy is on the far left. She is in our Bismarck office, even though it says she's in the southwest part of the state. She goes everywhere, as do we all, wherever we're needed in order to make a team that would meet the needs of each individual student we are asked to work with or infant toddler family situation. Jody Sheeler is in Minot with me. Ashley Martin next to her is in Fargo with Linda, and she does a lot of our sign communication instruction, as well as being a parent advisor and having beginning SLP venture under her belt that she will continue to do. Lana is in the middle, and she is my co-presenter tonight. She will be talking a lot, so you'll get to know her well. And she is right smack in the middle. And there's myself. I am in a Minot office. And next to me is Denise Marbach, who is at the School for the Deaf. And then next to her is Linda over in Fargo. You can reach out to any one of us at any time. Our contact information will be at the end. We are all trained teachers of the deaf, and we'll hit on that a little bit more later. I am going to pass the baton to Lana for a bit here. So Lana, as you're going through yours, if you need me, if I'm not advancing when you want me to, just let me know.
Sounds good. Okay, so we're going to start off with a couple of quick definitions, just language and vocabulary. So essentially, vocabulary is just words, just a list of words. You might know what they mean, but it's just a list of words. Language is when we take those words and we put them together in a meaningful way. So we put them together in a way that makes sense to somebody who knows the language. Language has grammatical structure, so we have to use that grammatical structure to have it make sense. And just remember that ASL is an actual language. It has its own grammatical structures that are different from English. So ASL, if you're not familiar with the term, that's American Sign Language, and that has its own language and it is its own language. It has its own grammatical structures. And so keeping that in mind, if you know a few signs, you have some sign vocabulary. You do not know sign language. You are not ASL fluent, but you have sign vocabulary. ASL having its own grammatical structures. When you put your signs together in the right order to meet the ASL structures, then you might know American Sign Language. So like having taken a sign class or knowing a few sign words does not mean that you know ASL. So just keep that in mind whenever someone asks you, oh, do you know ASL? Just to keep that straight. All right, so here's your quick quiz. Is it language or is it vocabulary? I know most of the people on are from our team, and I'm expecting you to cooperate and join in. The first one, the dog ate the bone, I will say it's language. We put the words in order, in English word order. It makes sense. It makes a phrase or a sentence. It's language. Horse and cat, words. They're vocabulary. The horse won the race. You get to type in the chat and say if you think the horse won the race is language or vocabulary. If you want to be make it easy, you can do L or V, whatever works for you. So the horse won the race. Is it language or is it vocabulary? Oh, you guys know your stuff. Everybody's saying language. Good job. Okay, how about elephant? Language or vocabulary? Oh, you guys are awesome. We have vocabulary. Okay, milk, please. Language or vocabulary? Getting a little trickier here. Must be trickier. Everybody slowed down. We have some vocabulary. We have some language. This one is a little tricky. In my opinion, I would say milk, please is language. And the reason I say that is because it's taking two words and putting them together. You could have milk and you could have please separately, and that would be vocabulary. And there is the argument that it is just vocabulary. But milk, please is a phrase. And because we're putting the words together, I would actually say that's language. How about fly what bird? Oh, we got some of each on that one too. Interesting. Oh, yeah, somebody gets a gold star. So it is not language if you're talking English, because we do not say fly what bird in English. We might say what flies, a bird, but we do not say fly what bird. So if this was a child who speaks English and they said fly what bird, I would not give them credit for having language. They're just giving us a list of words. However, if this child is an ASL child, then fly what bird is actually the correct grammatical structure in ASL. So fly what bird would be language in ASL. Linda gets the gold star. Just a little bit of a cheat since she has the background knowledge. Okay, so now that we know what vocabulary is, remember it's just the words. Language is when we put those words together and make sense. Now we add in receptive and expressive. So receptive, what the child understands. Expressive, what the child says. And we have receptive and expressive in both. So we have words we understand, receptive vocabulary. We have phrases and sentences we understand, receptive language. We have words that we say, mom and dad. We have expressive language. So that was expressive vocabulary. We have expressive language where we put it in a sentence. The dog ate the bone. We have it in a sentence. So what they understand, receptive, what they say or sign, expressive. And you have receptive and expressive for both vocabulary and language. This is the deep slide. We're not going to take you very deep because nobody wants a whole grammar lesson, language lesson, I don't think, on this. I'm just going to touch on each of these. We think about them when we're working with our kids as teachers of the deaf. That's something that we think about. Speech pathologists think about these. Most parents don't need to worry about these. That it's our job to talk to you if we think that this is an area that needs to be worked on. So for phonology, it's the rules of speech sounds or the study of the smallest unit of language. So for phonology, think about the difference between bat and hat. We have the b versus the h, changing the word. So just the very basic phoneme, the smallest unit. In sign language, it would be like a hand shape. It could be hand shape, movement, location, palm orientation, or non-manual markers. So if I was using a hand shape, you could have like not versus girl versus remember. They all have the same hand shape, but depending on where the placement is or the movement, it changes it. That's your smallest unit in ASL. Morphology, the study of the rules of word structure. The study of the smallest meaningful unit. So think in English, think dog versus dogs. When we add the S, we made it plural. We changed the meaning of it. Okay. In sign language, it's teach versus teacher. We change the meaning by just adding that extra piece. Syntax is the rules of sentence structure. Syntax is grammar. I mean, that's the basics. It's the way that you put the words in order or the rules of the language. Okay. So it's your sentence structure. In English, we just talked about how we would say, what flies a bird? A different example would be the blue car sped down the road. In sign language, we would not say the blue car, we would say car blue. We switch the order. So syntax is just that grammatical structure. Semantics is the meaning of the word. So think about multiple meaning words. So like the word date. You have dates that you eat, you have dates that you go on, and you have the date of the week. Each one of those has a different meaning. That's semantics. And each one of those has a different way of being signed. And we'll get into that a little later too. Pragmatics is how we use the language. So think about how you would speak to your boss versus how you would speak to your child. If we want to get really deep, there's registers in language. We're not going to go there, but essentially it's just how you use that language in the social environment. I think that's all we're going to do on that. If you're curious about that, you can try and get a hold of one of us, or you can look it up online. But essentially, those are the 5 domains of language. Now that we did the big domains, then you go to the functions. Functions of language, it's just basically, why do we use it? Why do we need language? One is to have conversations. We want to have that back and forth information exchange. The next one is description. I want to be able to describe. It's snowing outside and the snow is falling in little pellets. That's description. So we're describing what's happening. Narration is when you talk about an event, or it can be a real event or it can be a fictional. So it can be like a story that happened or did not happen. Explanation is when we dive down a little deeper and explain something in a little more detail. Direction is something most of our kids have dealt with because they get it in school a lot and from us a lot. Do this, do that, directions. Negotiating and persuasion. The example that came to me today was when you have a teenager and they want to negotiate or persuade you into changing their bedtime or things like that. Questioning, you ask a question and you expect a response. And then writing is when we take language and we put it into that written format. So now we're putting it on paper or on the computer. We are organizing sentences into paragraphs and then into documents. That's the written piece. And those are all of the reasons why we might want to have language.
And just to give a little plug, if anyone's looking, the reference on the bottom, John Luckner has helped us. He is like a guru in deaf education that we've worked with for many, many, many years. He's now since retired. He did help develop our language curriculum at School for the Deaf, and it's all based on these functions of language.
All right, so the nitty-gritty, how do we get language? I took these quotes. We took these quotes from the Linguistic Society. Children acquire language through interaction. That's that serve and return. Whether I start or whether the child starts, we get that back and forth going, and that's how kids learn language. Nowadays, they've done enough studies and researched enough that they've decided that the baby actually learns language or starts learning language while they're in the mother's womb. So that means that our kids that are born with hearing loss are actually born with a language delay when they're compared to their typically hearing peers, because they're not accessing the sound of their mother's voice in the same manner that a typically hearing baby would. So they're already starting, as soon as they're born, they're already starting with a language delay. The good news is you don't have to use flashcards, people. Just have fun. Just sit down with your kid. Whatever activity you're doing, whatever routine is part of your day, just talk. And don't forget to pause and let them talk. I have a little trouble with that, as people who know me know. So this one talks about kids need to hear enough language or see enough language to find the patterns. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be all from you. So that means it's not all pressure on you. You need that serve and return, so you have to give that wait time so the kid gives something back to you. And then it's also, it's parents, it's siblings, it's grandparents, aunts, uncles, all the extended family, it's daycare kids, it's everybody, it's classmates, it's not just on you. So you are not solely responsible for your child's language development. Having said that, you don't get to pluck them in front of a TV or plunk them down and have them listen to the radio. I don't know if anybody actually listens to the radio anymore, but if you do, Your kids are not going to learn language. Your kids are not going to learn their first language. We'll talk a little more about that. They're not going to learn language from TV or from listening to the radio. That interaction piece is missing. You have to have interaction for a child to learn language, at least for their first language. Once we have language, so like you'll see on TV or you'll read in a book or whatever, this person knew Russian and they came to the United States and they learned English by watching TV. They already had a language. So they used the language they had, which is their L1, we call it. They use the language they have to learn a second language. That is different. When we're talking about our little babies who don't have any language, we can't just have them watch TV or listen to a radio and have them learn language. It does not work. And sadly, we have seen that it does not work. Those of you that are speaking more than one language in the home or using sign language and spoken language, sometimes we wonder, are we just confusing our kids? No, you will figure out a system that works for you and you can switch back and forth between languages, whether it's spoken or signed. You can switch back and forth between languages, and that is just normal, healthy bilingual development. So don't worry if you're switching between languages. That's a good thing. We are not going to show the video clips tonight because they're really long and we don't have that much time. But we have a resources list at the end, and these are included in that resource list. Patricia Kuhl is a researcher who's done a lot of work in the development of language, how babies learn language. She's been doing it for a lot of years. There are several videos out there. These are 2 of them. There's also a TED Talk, and all of those are referenced in our resources at the end. So if you're kind of a language learning geek like me, you might want to go watch them. Or if you're just curious about a little more in-depth knowledge about how kids learn language, or how babies learn language, she's a really good person to watch the videos, and she's quite entertaining too. So the stages of language development, we start with exposure. So in the first year of life, we are just talking and our kids are doing nothing, right? No, the kids are taking statistics. They are learning. So when we talk, we call it front loading. So we put all this language out there and the babies are just taking that all in. And then they start to make connections, and that's where we get the comprehension. So they start to think, every time I see that stuff that I like so much, she does this and says milk. And they start to make the connection. Oh, that white stuff. Well, not that they know what white is, but that stuff, that if I do this, that must be the same thing. They just start to understand it, and then they'll produce it. So once they understand, once they make that connection that white stuff is milk, then eventually, once they've heard or seen that enough, then they'll start to produce it when they want it. There are stages of expressive language, both for spoken and for signed, and they're pretty similar. For spoken language, we start with the crying. Babies cry when they first are born. And then it kind of shifts over to the trills and the raspberries and the clicks, and then the cooing, ooh, and then the babbling, ma, 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 da, da, da. And then the jargon, which is that blah, 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 where they're telling you their story. You have no idea what they said, but they're telling you a story. They're using a lot of different intonation, and they're using some different vowels and consonants. And then you get those exciting first word approximations like wawa. And water, you said water. You want water. And then the conventional words where the kids will actually shift and say water. We see the same kind of thing in sign language. The babies will start with crying, and actually babies with hearing loss will start with some cooing and babbling as well. Sometimes that fades out. If they don't hear themselves, then that tends to fade out as they get older. But if they're exposed to sign language, then you'll start to see manual babbling, which is things like closing the hand, moving the hand toward the body, moving the hand up and down. That's kind of manual babbling. There's also gestures, like when they wave high or they put their arms up, and then pointing, lots of pointing. In sign language, there are also sign approximations. So when babies first start to sign, typically hearing people often will miss what the baby said because we aren't used to watching for these things and we don't necessarily know what they look like. So if the baby wants to sign water, they're probably not going to start with the W at the chin. It might look like this, it might look like this. It might be in that general area, but it's probably not going to look like the W, because that's kind of a tough fine motor gesture. And when they're first learning, it's like the baby that said Wawa. They didn't say water right off the bat. They're practicing and they're getting it down. So it's going to look a little bit different, but you'll start to make the connection. And we might have to guess to start with. We might have to go, oh, and just like when the baby says Wawa, we don't know if it's water, but we guess it is, and we get excited. We want to do the same thing with sign language. If they're doing this, oh, you want water, that's right, here's your water. And then eventually it will shift and become the actual conventional sign.
I think I'm next.
You are next. You're
I'm
up.
up. I'm back. All right. So we have a timeline of acquisition, and just to preface, we took a general one. There are variations that you may run across, but this is pretty standard on what we see. One thing I do want to mention, we have high expectations because we know that kids can reach this expressive vocabulary level within these month ranges. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone from the team, Lana, a year, 2 years ago when the, I'm trying to think, Academy of Pediatrics or CDC put out something that was much lower than this. And yeah, go ahead.
The CDC put it out that the 2-year-olds only needed 50 words. That did not make us very happy. 50 was like, if they had 50, we were good to go. 50 is the bare minimum.
It is the bottom. That is where, and so, and people may be surprised by that because it's been told to them, or their pediatrician says, or don't worry, they're not talking at 2. And that's really not the case. We're very much trying to get away from that, because we really do, whether they're using a spoken word or not, they need to be expressing themselves. There's so much frustration that comes if they aren't. We're starting to see behaviors when they don't. It's looked at as other things that it may not necessarily be if it is a hearing loss. So looking at these markers and trying to keep even the kids we're working with and sharing this information with families, that this is what we're shooting for. This is what we want to see. The telegraphic stage there is meaning that the sentences used are similar to what might be sent in a telegraph. So a short, simple sentence or a phrase. We want to see that between 2 years and 30 months. If you have been around a very talkative toddler who's 2 to 3 years old, I hear now, I used to hear it as a parent, now I hear it as people saying, my grandchild, she just goes on and on and on. I've reached that age. But you hear some very rich expressive language from very young kiddos when given the access and support that they need to develop that. So the conditions or support for language learning that we're referencing is adequate exposure in quality and quantity. So you can't just give them a lot of words, it's got to be quality. And by that, you're having all those measures that Lana hit on. So you're narrating. Even we'll tell families if you're unloading the dishwasher, and it's not comfortable and it's not natural always, but oh, mommy's taking the clean dishes out. Now mommy's putting the dish up in the cupboard. Like, you're narrating your day. You're giving them some quality to the conversation or language that you're trying to share with them, because it takes so many repetitions for that to stick and make sense for a kiddo. So we want to make sure that we're giving them all of the exposure that is required. Access, which is the focus of this presentation, means visually or verbally, and could be tactily too. There are kiddos that need to access language through all their senses. We don't want to leave out that there is a tactile way of doing that. But for the kiddos that we see most often, it's not just put on here their listening devices and now they have access to sound and they're going to get language. We'll get into that a little bit later here. But we really want to make sure they have access one way or the other. Meaningful interactions, most often between family when they're little, holding them right here, that is meaningful. Reading a book, making eye contact, being in that bonding moment is going to make them want more of that. People, kids, we crave that. We crave that connection, and it helps develop language. And then you need skilled language users. And this will come up again. I think we touch on a ceiling effect. I have it somewhere else later. But if we have someone who is a sign language learner, but they're learning from someone who has a very limited vocabulary, they will not become a skilled language user of sign. So we'll revisit that if that's confusing, but I think that's clear. Oh, and then English, we have lots of examples of this, but I really liked this one. And so I'm going to make Lana demonstrate this for you guys, because in English, we say up, 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 up for all of these. If we did this in sign, we would do up, 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 up. I don't think there's one that really does up in this. If you sign this, you're not going to sign it up as the sign is, or UP, up. You're not going to do that for these. So Lana, show off your skills.
I'm not sure that we're going to do all of them, but like
No.
wake up, you just open your eyes, wake up. Speak up, you're going to do like speak and then like louder. Speak up. Up for election, it's just like write a report, call up your friends, warm up leftovers, clean up the kitchen, lock up the house. There is not one of these that I would sign up, even though that's the word. And if you're an early sign language user, you might try and use the word up, like speak up for election. You don't know how to actually change that and use the meaning of the word. This is semantics. So when we talk semantics back those slides ago, this is semantics, multiple meaning words. Up has a ton of different meanings, especially when you put it with something else.
Thank you. What's different about language acquisition for a child that has hearing differences? They've missed hearing in utero. So Anna touched on that earlier. We were just having this conversation as a group on a Sky High call, that if we're looking at, because language deprivation has really become a more prominent verbiage that we're using to describe kiddos that may lack or have no language at the point that we think they should, or we know they should. But if you have gone, you start hearing in utero at 20 weeks, and if you've gone those last 20 weeks without having any access, then you could be considered born language delayed. Incomplete or no access to language auditorily or visually. Unfortunately, we have experiences. We have seen this. We have kiddos that we know have had no access. And that doesn't mean they didn't have hearing aids or an implant. They may have. It just doesn't happen when you just put on equipment. And if you don't have someone signing in your home and you don't have a fluent sign language, which is the next one that's happening for them, then they're having differences in the way that they are being required to learn or acquire language. The ceiling effect is what I was getting to before, was if you have somebody who is trying to teach you sign, which I know we have, and I do not ever want any parent to think they aren't learning fast enough, because if you're learning sign as a second language, anything is better than nothing. And as you give that to your child, you will get better and you will find avenues for them to learn more too. I think sometimes when we see other professionals that have, I'll use myself for an example. I would not be the best person to teach that. That's not my background. I am not a sign language instructor. I'm not an interpreter. I can carry on a conversation, but if I had a child that I was trying to work with, they would only learn as much as I know. And that may not be enough for them. usage of their device requires auditory training, which is very explicit and direct and needed in a specialized way with repetition, and it follows a hierarchy. And again, back to it just doesn't happen if you put on hearing devices. And then inconsistent and decreased perception of incidental language and learning. I think one of the statistics that we hear most often is for babies, incidental learning is the #1 way they learn language. So listening to mom and dad have a conversation at dinner when they're sitting in the high chair, or their brother's squabbling, or whatever might be going on around them is a #1 way that they are learning. And if that isn't happening for a child who either needs it visually or auditorily, then they are going to have more challenges. The other things that get in the way of this that aren't listed here is noise. As adults who have learned how to ignore background noise, my space heater is on right now because it's cold when it shouldn't be. But that noise is not bothering me. I don't know if anybody else can hear that running back there, but there's that. The buzzing of my lights. I'm on a busy street downtown. I can hear the cars only if I tune into that. But if you are someone with a hearing difference, then all of those things are going to get in the way of my message, and it gets all mucky and muddled and makes it way more difficult, challenging, and fatiguing to listen to the speaker, which we see often happening in our classrooms for our kiddos. Distance makes it more difficult. You get a 6 decibel increase on the hearing loss for every 3 feet you get away from the speaker. So mom's in the kitchen, child's in the living room, we're 20 feet away. We've now increased that hearing loss. And then so fortunate that we got to experience COVID and masks and how that impacted. We have a lot of research that shows the speech distortion, the speech reduction, and the lack of lip reading that was available to those with hearing differences. And not even just lip reading, but you covered up so much of the face that the facial cues that go along with sign language were very limiting. I should pause and just take a breath and say, are there any questions about anything we've talked about thus far? We're kind of cruising right through without any interaction, but
No, no questions really, Nicole, but it sure is bringing back a lot of memories.
I bet, Doneen, I bet.
Yeah.
And feel free to share any of your experiences at any time too. That's always great. So the things that help our kiddos with hearing differences access language are their devices. I think I've beat this horse a bit, but it's not just the devices. It requires auditory training and follow up with their audiologists and appropriate programming. There are audiologists who, with their best intentions, don't know exactly what kids need or how to do that. So you always want to make sure to encourage families to get to where they need to be. I will speak from my experience, and I think our team has all had experiences. If we have supported a family in questioning or going for a second opinion or asking, usually their primary audiologist also agrees with us. They are not afraid to bring somebody else in. And I think that's us in the profession altogether, our whole team. I want my other team members to tell me, I don't know it all. One audiologist doesn't know it all. We all have to work together to make sure that we are helping share and give this family and these kiddos the best opportunities that they can. American Sign Language, you need strong language models. Oh, I don't know how I did that. Mentor is a new program that we've started in North Dakota as well, but having a deaf mentor, we have heard of it nationally. We have seen it firsthand now starting in North Dakota, but makes a huge difference in families being immersed in what actually American Sign Language is meant to look like and how it works. And them not, it puts you on the spot. Two of the families specifically that I can think of have said they were very nervous about doing this, and it's been the best thing. And I agree. I understand how that would be. Oh my gosh, I don't know the language. I'm very, how will we understand each other? And it works. It works beautifully. Then having access to the deaf community and other deaf adults and social opportunities is always a huge thing. Communication systems are different than language. These are tools that help you access vocabulary. They are not their own language. So we have cued speech, there is C sign, there's pidgin, and written language. And we, at the end, we have videos that you'll be able to access in the resources that will show the differences between those. With that being said, those are how they access language when you think about a visual or a written or a auditory way. I feel strongly about all of these things being needed to really access language. We have to have parent and family involvement. We do visits for families, typically about 1 hour a week. That is not going to do it. That is not going to give any child access to language. We're going to help the family and the parents learn how to give their child access to language. We do that through parent coaching and the early intervention system. Also, we'll get to that later, the difference between those two programs briefly, but that kind of model. We do direct teaching, our parent-infant program. We use the Sky High curriculum, language arts curriculum that Lana had referenced earlier. I need to quit touching my mouse here, my keypad. And then again, the deaf community and a variety of experiences and taking that language with you into those experiences. So it's not just about reading books at night, although that's a great experience and something to put into your routines, but experiences going grocery shopping, using language at McDonald's, all of those different types of experiences help provide different language models and experiences. We put this in just because people are always curious. We talk about hearing devices, and I think everyone notices these typical hearing aids up on the top right, although I will tell you, people are so surprised when a 2-month-old baby has little hearing aids in their ears. They just didn't have any idea that they could make them that small and that little babies would be wearing, and they do, and it's great. The one to the left here, that is a soft band bone anchored hearing aid. So that means something is keeping sound from getting in the ear, either in the outer ear or the middle ear, but the inner ear is functioning. So that little oscillator that you see is sending sound through vibration through the bone. This is another type of bone anchored hearing aid. Not approved until they get a little bit older, which is why they have the soft band. And then, of course, cochlear implants, which I would say are newer, but they're not new anymore. It's old. And they don't all look like this big processor with the soccer balls behind his ears. Some kids still have those. You'll see kids that just have a little piece right there on their head. Yep, still me, okay. The difference between EI, or early intervention, and PIP, our program, the parent-infant program. EI monitors their global development. And even though we are doing assessments that look at all the domains of development, we are looking at it more so through the telescope of how the hearing loss is impacting that stage of development. So we all look at social, emotional, adaptive skills, self-help. Are they feeding? Are they getting their needs met? But when we look at it, we're like looking at how is the language or delay of language, or what language do they need to be able to do that? They do what's called a routines-based parent coaching. So they'll do an interview that is called the routines-based interview. And then they work through the child's day, the family's day, and they put the goals in as part of their day. Their funding is through Medicaid and other sources, and they are Part C, which is a federally funded, mandated program. You'll see this across the United States. Us, parent infant, we're focusing on the development of hearing differences for communication opportunities, language development, pragmatics, that social use of language Lana touched on, auditory hierarchy. So we want to know the awareness or detection, their identification, and so on through that. We help them with community connections, connecting to other families, parent-to-parent support, and then any other resources. We are not funded through Medicaid. We are funded through the state of North Dakota. As I mentioned, we are under Department of Public Instruction, and we are not Part C. We are not a federally mandated program. We are different from many other states, and we are lucky to have this program that runs parallel to our early intervention. Our team is all teachers of the deaf, so we really do focus on the impact of a hearing loss. And why do you want a teacher of the deaf to be part of the team? We have a few things there listed that have been taken and shared, but I think many times one of the things that happens when you don't have a teacher of the deaf looking at the child through the telescope that we have or the training that we have is the child may be misinterpreted or misdiagnosed. Oftentimes I've seen kids where it is assumed they have a cognitive delay when in fact they do not have a cognitive delay. We have kids that are assumed to have ADHD or autism when they might. I'm not saying there is not dual diagnoses or anything like that, but a lot of the time it's their lack of language. Can you imagine? I wouldn't want to sit in a classroom when I didn't understand anything either. And I would totally look like I was ADHD because I'm not paying attention, because I'm looking around, because I'm trying to find anything that will give me any information onto what's going on. So even at the earliest stages, I think we see many of these indicators, and that's why we always want to rule out any sensory disability before looking at any other concerns for a child. If that's one thing I could share with professionals and families is if you're looking at a child and you're thinking they're ADHD or autistic, what is their language level? What is their access to language? Do they have a hearing loss? We have so many kids that are missed, and it might be a mild or it might be a unilateral. So we really want to bring our teachers of the deaf into the realm.
I would just add to that, Nicole, even if your child passed the newborn hearing screening, we can lose our hearing later in, not necessarily later in life, like as an adult even, we can lose our hearing at any point. So even if your child passed the newborn hearing screening, it still would be valuable to go and get assessed.
Thank you. Which is why I love school districts like where Tammy, who used to be at Bismarck, still does, and not to call anybody out, but I'm just saying they still do kindergarten hearing screenings, which I think is huge. And I wish that was just something that that all school districts did and looked at. This all access pass, and there is a language stimulus. The child must be able to obtain all the parts of that stimulus, not just missing full access to sound, but visual access as well. So we want to make sure that we are giving them everything they need. And here's some examples of lack of full access to language. And it gives some spoken examples and some sign examples. And the thing that comes to mind for me, I just wanted to share a little story here, was if you miss a sound or misinterpret a sound, if your access is through audition and you're missing one part of a word, and that word is part of a sentence, and that sentence is part of a story, now you are missing or misinterpreting that whole story. So I was giving an assessment to a middle schooler, and it was language comprehension, and his primary access was through spoken language. He was a spoken language user. He was sitting in classrooms all day long, learning and doing adequately well. When I gave him the test, I had read a story about a baboon. I think it was about Jane Goodall and a baboon and study of baboons. And it's not a very long story, but I gave this story, and then you have columns and you ask these questions going through probably 5 or 6. And he's getting all of the questions wrong, by the way. By the time we get to the last one, I said something and he said, "Why are you talking about a balloon?" And I thought, well, no wonder he got all those questions wrong, because he heard one thing wrong, or he didn't know what a baboon was. So he filled it in with what he knew that sounded like baboon sounds like balloon. And then he thought all of that was everything I was asking was about a balloon, and it made no sense to him. Had he not said that to me out loud, had he not said, "Why are you talking about a balloon?" I would have never known that that was the thing that made all of this wrong, which wasn't wrong if we go back now, and I would have explained baboon and what a baboon was and what that, so, I mean, just the smallest little thing that we're never thinking about when kids are in a classroom and the teacher is talking as fast as I tend to talk. I was in a meeting today and they were like, "Whoa, slow down." But when you're talking that fast and what's going on in the classroom and desks are moving and there's so much, it's so complicated for kiddos. And the same thing would be going on in a classroom. When I went to grad school and I had gone to school with deaf adults, and they would say quit, like we would sign on the side, like we think we're being secretive. And the deaf person would say, "Stop, you're so distracting." Like, they need to concentrate too, no matter what it is, no matter what way your access is. If you're missing one little thing or you're being distracted by another thing, then you're going to have an impact of that. Oh, I'm done. Back to Lana. Oh, I'm hot.
I'm up again. And so basically, though, what this slide basically says is we're not saying that you need to sign to your child. We're not saying you need to speak to your child. We're just saying that the kids need access. They need to be surrounded by lots of language, meaningful language, and they need access to that language in whatever form it takes.
I got it.
You're good. All right. So this, we always think about when a child has hearing differences, we think about that audition piece. Okay, well, they can't hear. Yes. Then you look below the surface at all the other areas that it can affect. And I have the list up there. Essentially, when you do not have access or full access to spoken language or signed language, if you don't have access to spoken language, you're probably going to have speech delays. If you don't have access to spoken or signed language, your vocabulary or your language might be delayed. You could have language deprivation. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. Your cognition can be delayed because we need language to think. And so when we don't have language or we don't have a robust language, then that can impact our cognition or how we think. We need language to communicate with each other, as we learned earlier. So if we don't have language or enough language, we can't communicate properly, and that affects our social skills, and that also impacts our mental health because we start to feel isolated. You can also just feel isolated because you're the only kid in your school that's wearing devices, and that in itself can be isolating, and there can be mental health challenges from that. With limited language, you typically have limited educational and vocational or job choices, and that can lead to incarceration if you choose a career that or a job that isn't legal. Then you may become incarcerated. Also, you just might not understand the rules and the laws, and that can lead to incarceration as well. All right, language deprivation. This is the big thing that gets talked about a lot now. It says on here, it is due to a chronic lack of full access. So what that means in the first years of life, when we really want to be developing language, what that means is if your child's device breaks down and you send it away to get fixed and it's gone for 2 weeks and it comes back, and so your child's been without those devices for 2 weeks, that's not language deprivation. Okay, that might impact your child's education and impact your child's language, and it may cause language delay, but that is not language deprivation. True language deprivation is chronic. So when we're talking language deprivation, we are talking kids that never wear their devices, kids that can't get access through their devices, kids that never see sign in those first 3 to 5 years of life. So they're pretty much, they have no access or very limited access to any kind of language. That's where we're starting to talk language deprivation. And we have, Nicole's going to flip to the next one. We have a slide here. We're not going to show this. It'll come up. So this is Dr. Gulati, and he gives a presentation on language deprivation syndrome. And the presentation is an hour long, which sounds really long, but it is very interesting. Again, I'm a bit of a geek about it, but it's very interesting. So if you are interested in learning more about language deprivation, I really encourage you to watch the video. It is in our resources list. And he talks a lot about how language deprivation affects the child and affects the development of the child's brain.
And am I muted or can you hear me?
You're good.
Okay. I just too a language geek, but not really, because I find him just very engaging. I think anybody could watch this and find this interesting. We had him actually as a speaker at the school 2 years ago for our opening in services, and he's just a wonderful, very intelligent man, and his story in itself is interesting. So I encourage anyone who ever goes in and watches this video to watch this.
And this statistic, if this statistic is correct, then only 30% of the kids in our state have full access to either spoken or signed language. 70% are missing out on some. And that's why access is the name of the game. Our kids need to have access if they're going to develop language properly.
Way to tie that all in there right towards the end, Lana. Good job.
All right, just a quick what it might look like. If a child has language deprivation from birth to 5 years of age, what we start to see is the delays in cognitive development and executive function. So if you don't know what executive function is, it's found at the front of the brain, and basically it helps you control your impulsivity, and it helps you problem solve. And so kids will have challenges in those areas, especially later in life. And it also can impact development of theory of mind. And if you don't know what that is, there's a lot to theory of mind, but essentially it's understanding that other people may think or see things differently than you do. And it's also knowing that people might need more information than they have to figure something out. So the example is Dad and Johnny bake a cake. Dad puts the cake in the cupboard. Johnny goes out to play. Dad decides that the frosting might melt in the cupboard, so he puts the cake in the fridge. Johnny comes back in. Where is he going to look for the cake? The kids that say, he's going to look in the fridge, don't have very highly developed theory of mind, because they think that Johnny knows exactly what they know. They don't realize that Johnny doesn't know Dad put it in the fridge because Johnny was outside. The kids that say, oh, it's in the cupboard, he's going to look in the cupboard, they have a higher developed theory of mind. They know that Johnny doesn't have that information. Even though they know it, he doesn't know it. School-age kids, we talked a little bit about that L1, that first language. For school-age kids, if they have language deprivation, they don't have a first language, and you need a first language to use to learn how to read and write. Literacy is, the written word is essentially a second form of the spoken word. And so you have to have the spoken word typically, or a language first. You can have ASL, that can be your first language, and that can be used to teach literacy, but you have to have a first language. And when you have language deprivation, the kids just don't have that. So it makes learning literacy and numeracy, any kind of educational skills, it makes those very challenging. Again, if you're really interested in this, you should watch Dr. Gulati's presentation. Back to you, Nicole.
Yep, I'm here and I'm gonna kind of let you read through this, but we have like 2 minutes left and I want to make sure I share the resource list on the recorded video so anyone could find those if they wanted to come back. But overall, parents' devices, if you're choosing a spoken language LISL approach, they need to wear their devices ideally all waking hours. We, working with families, know that that is not always the case, and we don't want anyone to feel bad about that. Like we get there's a reality as well, and there's a learning curve, and we work with families to help them understand that and what's important if that's what they're choosing. Language rich environment, having language all around them all the time, interacting with your child a lot, making sure a teacher of the deaf is part of the team, having high expectations, which is like a huge thing for me. So when we looked at those timelines and what we want to see kids do, we have to set the expectation. We have to stop saying, well, he can't hear me, so we're happy that he has 10 words or something like that. There's all kinds of different reasons that people think it's okay that a child with hearing differences might not be progressing at the same level as another peer, but it's not okay to say it's okay. Like we just have to set the expectations for them. And we work with families and we work through this as considering all communication opportunities, all of the things. If something is not working, then we come back. Maybe it's a combination of things. Maybe it's having a deaf mentor. Maybe there's so many other opportunities that need to be discussed, and it's not just spoken or sign. And then these are our providers here, making sure teachers deaf again are included both at all IFSP meetings, at their 2729 meetings, in the evaluations. I just saw an evaluation that was done by a lot of people who knew nothing about a deaf child. And I think it's a shame that he was looked at without the expertise of a teacher of the deaf. It's just my soapbox, sorry. These are strategies. Take a screenshot, give us a call, we'll explain it more. Because we have several slides, more strategies that we work with. And there's great, is Linda still on here, or any of you might know, the shared reading that shows how deaf parents sign books with their children, which is signing on the body, signing on the object, lots of those types of things. Positioning are shown and practiced in shared reading. I highly recommend that if people are wanting to sign with their kiddos. And here are all of the resources. So Doneen, when these get posted up, if someone was watching this, they could go through this on their own, or they would have to watch it to get these.
Unless you're sending the PowerPoint to Jerusa,
Okay.
you may want to do that so that they can get those resources right off the slides. Ouch, that dog biting my toe.
Okay. At least the resources pages, Drusha, I think I'll probably send those to you so we can post those or share those somewhere, because there's some really wonderful things to explore in here.
Okay.
So I'm just kind of clicking through them now. Some of the videos that were mentioned earlier, TED Talks, NAD, National Association for the Deaf. All the gurus that we've learned through Mark Marshark and John Luckner. And of course, Sky High curriculum, which is the foundation for much of the services that we provide, and assessment as well is included in there. And the Deaf Mentor program also is through Sky High. So, and this is where we are, and these are our phone numbers. If anyone ever needs to get a hold of any of us, you can call any one of these numbers and find us.
Nice
don't know if-
job, ladies.
I wouldn't say I don't know if there's any questions to the I was kind of preaching to the choir there, but Lana, thank you, Lana. Beautiful job. And thank you, Renee. I was thinking about the sign, the slide for up, and I thought we could have just talked that out and let Renee sign it all. We appreciate your time, Renee.
Zach must have been kind of well, he was, I don't know, Tammy, he was kind of I don't want to say eccentric, but he was unique. When he was learning to talk after he was finally aided, it seemed like the best time that we could get his full attention. And it seems weird to me because of the background noise, but it was in the car. So we would drive around for hours, right? So the background noise of the tires and the wind and that it just didn't seem to bother him. But you know, we would drive around and he'd point and then we'd say tree, that's a tree. You know, I mean, we just would instill as much language as, so when he was itty bitty, well, he was diagnosed at 2.5. Anyway, we did a lot of driving around. So it's a good thing that I worked 16-hour shifts and I had every other day to drive around town, for crying out loud. But yeah, it was something. And we were also really fortunate that we did have a teacher of the deaf at our school, because there was another student that was had hearing challenges too. So that was nice to have someone right there. But we did pull in, I think we did pull in some of the PIPs at various times, because he did start showing some behaviors too. Like when he couldn't talk, he would scream. I mean, he would just get so frustrated and scream and scream and scream. And oh man, I will never forget that. Was a lot. Was a lot. But yeah, so this was really like reliving that all in my head again. But I really thank you ladies for doing this.
Well,
So
thank you for sharing, Donnie.
yeah,
Yeah.
so Jason isn't on anymore. Did anybody know him?
I don't. I actually wrote it down to find out.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, all right. So we have another one next week and the week after. So we'll same time, same station.
Donnie,
Yes.
I sent Tori an email just to note the flyer that she sent out for not yours is next week, but the panel call,
Yeah.
the date was wrong on the flyer.
Okay.
I can't get to my May because I'm stuck in April, but I think she had left it on May 2nd, which was the original date, but then she had changed it. It's May 9th.
Okay.
But the flyer still says May 2nd. So
Okay.
if we just want to double check that and make sure that
Sure.
gets switched. Yeah, that'd be
All
great.
right. Sounds great. Well, thanks everyone. Thank you,
Okay,
Renee.
thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.